In 1997, Ethiopia lost the only oil refinery it ever had, along with its entire coastline. Nearly 30 years later, it's trying to build the capability back from scratch in the middle of the desert, hundreds of miles from the sea. The project is called the Gode Refinery, and on the surface, it looks like just another construction project. But this one refinery could quietly shift the balance of power across the entire Horn of Africa. Not because Ethiopia is about to become a major oil-producing country, it isn't. And not because this project will make Ethiopia fully independent from foreign energy sources, it won't do that either. The real story here is more subtle and more interesting than either of those things. For a long time, Ethiopia has relied almost entirely on fuel bought from other countries to keep its economy running. Diesel for trucks, gasoline for cars, fuel for farm equipment, and jet fuel for airplanes all had to be shipped in from outside the country. This dependence is expensive and risky. In 2024, Ethiopia's central bank had to set aside about $175 million in foreign currency just to pay for fuel imports. That is a huge amount of money, simply to keep the country moving. Now, in a remote part of Ethiopia known as the Somali regional state, something different is being built. The refinery is designed to process around 3.5 million tons of oil every year, which works out to roughly 70,000 barrels a day. The oil it will process comes from a nearby area called the Hilala field. Construction officially began in October 2025, and the goal is to have it running by around 2027. The company building it is a Chinese firm called Golden Concord Group, or GCL. At first glance, this looks like a simple energy project. But if you look closer, it's really about something else, giving Ethiopia more options. For a country that is landlocked, with no direct access to the sea, having more options can be a form of power. To understand why this matters so much, it helps to know what Ethiopia lost in the past. Some people call this Ethiopia's first ever oil refinery, but that's not quite accurate. Ethiopia actually used to operate a refinery in a place called Assab, back when Eritrea was still part of Ethiopia. That refinery opened in 1967. But when Eritrea became independent, Ethiopia lost its only access to the coastline, along with that refinery. Operations there eventually stopped completely in 1997. Ever since then, Ethiopia has had to import almost all of its refined fuel from other countries. So really, this new refinery is more like the return of a capability Ethiopia used to have decades ago, before it lost its coastline. And where it's being built matters a lot. It isn't near the ocean, it's deep inside Ethiopia, close to where the oil actually comes out of the ground. This refinery is built around crude oil from the Hilala field, part of a larger area known as the Ogaden Basin. Not far away, Ethiopia is also working on natural gas projects in the Kalub and Hilala fields, which could be used to build fertilizer plants and other industries. Put all of this together, and you can see the outline of something much bigger than a single refinery. An entire industrial zone built around locally available energy, including oil, gas, fertilizer production, and the infrastructure needed to connect it all. But having a big vision is very different from actually building something that works. And that gap is what will determine whether this project truly succeeds. The number everyone focuses on is 70,000 barrels a day. That sounds like a lot, and it is. But in the oil industry, that number can be misleading. Just because a refinery is designed to handle 70,000 barrels a day doesn't mean it will actually process that much every single day. To hit that number, you need a steady supply of crude oil, working pipelines, reliable electricity, clean water, storage facilities, ongoing maintenance, and skilled workers. Most importantly, you need the oil fields feeding the refinery to consistently produce enough oil. If the oil field can't keep up, the refinery's fancy capacity number becomes meaningless. So really, this isn't just one project. It's a whole chain of connected pieces. The Hilala field has to produce the oil. Infrastructure has to move that oil to the refinery. The refinery has to process it. Then trucks or pipelines have to distribute the finished fuel to people across the country. And finally, everyday Ethiopians have to be able to afford and use that fuel for the whole system to make economic sense. Because of this, the most telling number might not be the refinery's maximum capacity. It might be how often the refinery is actually running at full strength. A smaller refinery that works reliably every day could end up being more valuable than a giant one that keeps breaking down or running out of oil to process. Now think about where Ethiopia's fuel used to come from before this refinery. For decades, the answer has mostly been Djibouti, a small country next door with access to the sea. Since Ethiopia has no coastline of its own, it depends heavily on Djibouti's ports to bring in fuel and other goods. This dependence is risky because fuel isn't a luxury. It's the energy that keeps nearly everything else in the country moving. If something disrupts that supply chain, the effects ripple through the whole economy. Here's the important part that people often misunderstand. This new refinery does not make Djibouti unnecessary. Ethiopia will still need ports. It will still need to import things from other countries. And having a domestic refinery doesn't protect Ethiopia from rising global oil prices. What it does change is the mix of Ethiopia's dependence. Instead of relying completely on refined fuel shipped in from far away, Ethiopia could start producing some of that fuel itself. That means less fuel has to travel all the way from an overseas refinery to Ethiopian consumers. And that gives Ethiopia something valuable it hasn't had in a long time: a backup option. If global fuel prices suddenly spike, or if shipping routes get disrupted, or foreign currency becomes hard to come by, a domestic refinery can't fix everything, but it can soften the blow. That cushioning effect is really the heart of why this project matters strategically. And Ethiopia isn't doing this alone in the region. All of East Africa is racing to build up its energy infrastructure. Uganda, for example, is moving toward producing its own oil, which will be shipped through a massive pipeline stretching from Uganda's oil fields all the way to the port of Tanga in Tanzania, a distance of about 1,443 kilometers. There's even talk of building a regional refinery at Tanga itself. Step back and look at the whole map. Uganda has oil. Tanzania has an important port on the Indian Ocean. Kenya has its own ports at Mombasa and Lamu. Djibouti controls Ethiopia's main route to the sea. And now Ethiopia is building an inland refining hub of its own. This means the real competition in East Africa isn't just about who finds oil first. It's about who controls the pipelines, ports, storage facilities, and refineries that turn raw oil into something usable. That's where the real economic and political power tends to concentrate. China is also deeply involved here. The company GCL has been working on Ethiopia's Ogaden energy projects for years, going back to when Ethiopia produced its first test barrels of oil from that region in 2018. Now that involvement is moving further down the supply chain, from just pulling oil out of the ground to actually refining it. This matters because there's a big difference between simply exporting raw oil and building a real industrial economy around it. If Ethiopia only exports crude oil, most of the profit from turning it into usable fuel happens somewhere else. But if Ethiopia refines it at home, the country can capture more of that value. More jobs, more industrial skills, more infrastructure, and more government revenue. Still, the hardest question remains: can Ethiopia actually pull this off? Building a refinery is one challenge. Building an entire working energy system around it is a much bigger one. The refinery sits in a remote, difficult-to-reach part of the country, so heavy equipment has to be transported in, roads need upgrading, and power and water supplies need to be reliable. There's also a human side to this story. The Somali region of Ethiopia has historically been overlooked and underdeveloped. A massive energy project like this could transform the local economy, but only if local communities actually benefit through jobs, businesses, and improved infrastructure. If people feel left out while outsiders profit from resources extracted from their land, that could create serious political tension. So, will this refinery make Ethiopia completely energy independent? No, and that's not really the right way to measure its success. The better question is whether it will make Ethiopia less vulnerable. A refinery can't stop global oil prices from rising, and it can't replace international trade. But it can give Ethiopia more flexibility and a bit of breathing room during a crisis. If everything goes according to plan, if the oil field produces enough, if the infrastructure holds up, and if the refinery runs reliably, Ethiopia will take a real step away from complete dependence on imported fuel. And that shifts the country's bargaining power, changes the economics of its transportation system, and could even reshape how important the surrounding trade routes are. For decades, Ethiopia's lack of coastline forced it to depend entirely on foreign ports and suppliers just to keep its economy running. Now, the country is attempting to bring part of that energy chain back inside its own borders. And if this project actually succeeds, the most valuable thing coming out of that refinery might not be diesel or gasoline at all. It might be choice itself. Because when a country only has one route for something as essential as fuel, whoever controls that route holds real power over it. But when a country has two routes instead of one, everything shifts. And when it starts building the tools to control its own energy supply chain, the balance of power shifts again. The desert may look quiet right now, and the refinery is still under construction, with no guarantee of success. But underneath that sand, Ethiopia is trying to build something far bigger than an oil plant. It's trying to build real independence, one barrel at a time.